April 9th, 1917, 0500 hours. I must record this while I still possess the faculty to distinguish between what happens and what is happening. The distinction grows thinner. This morning, but no, I must be precise. Precision is all that remains to me now. This morning at precisely 0347 hours, I woke to find Corporal Davies standing at the foot of my dugout. This would be unremarkable, except that Davies occupies a shell crater 40 yards north of here, has occupied it since Tuesday. Most of him anyway. His left portion from the ribs down remained standing where it fell, refusing to accept its circumstances. We've grown accustomed to walking around it. But here was Davies, complete and whole, and watching me with an expression of such profound patience that I knew immediately something had shifted in the fundament of things. He didn't speak at first. The watching went on for perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps 30 minutes. Time moves differently when impossible things occur. It thickens, develops weight and texture. I could feel each second passing through my throat like swallowing stones. "I need you to understand something," Davies finally said, and his voice had harmonics that voices shouldn't have, subtones that registered in my teeth rather than my ears. "I'm going to show you something, and you need to not look away." I wanted to call out, to wake Morrison in the next dugout, but my throat had forgotten its purpose. Davies stepped closer, and I could smell him. Not rot, which would have been a comfort because rot follows rules, but something else. He smelled like the moment before rain, like copper pennies on the tongue, like the specific fear sweat that comes in the 3 seconds between hearing the shell and knowing where it will land. "I'm still in the crater," he said conversationally, as if we were discussing cricket scores. "That hasn't changed. What's changed is that the crater is also in me, now. We've developed a reciprocal relationship." He opened his uniform jacket. I expected, what? A wound. But what I saw was depth, not his chest, but depth itself, receding inward past where his back should be, past where the dugout wall should be, going down and down into geometries that made my eyes water, trying to follow them. And somewhere in that depth, yes, there was the crater, seen from an impossible angle, from inside itself looking out, and there was the other portion of Davies, still standing, still refusing its circumstances. "The thing is," Davies continued, and his voice was coming from multiple distances now, some close to my ear, some echoing up from that terrible depth. "Once you've been opened like this, you start to notice that everything else is also open. The ground, for instance. Have you really looked at it lately? Not just mud and clay, but what it's made of underneath the underneath." I found my voice then, though it came out strange. "You're dead. You died on Tuesday." "Death," Davies said, and the word did something to the air, made it crystallize briefly, "is a very specific state with very specific rules. But the rules have been amended recently, haven't you noticed? The amendment started when that yellow fog rolled in last month, the one that moved against the wind. Since then, the boundaries have been negotiable." He was right. I had noticed, but hadn't let myself know I'd noticed. The way Williams's prayers had started being answered, but wrong. He'd prayed for water, and it rained upward from the earth. He'd prayed for his mother, and something wearing her approximate shape had appeared in the wire, beckoning with too many joints in its fingers. Davies reached out then, and I want to be precise about this, because precision is all that remains to me. His hand covered the distance between us without crossing it. One moment his arm was at his side, the next his fingers were touching my forehead, but the arm hadn't moved through the intervening space. It had simply edited the distance out. When he touched me, I saw. The crater wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a hole in everything. In the ground, yes, but also in time, in the sequence of events that we call reality. The shell that created it had punctured through into something else, and that something else had been slowly leaking in ever since. Not gas. Gas would have been merciful. Gas just rearranges your chemistry. This rearranged the principles by which chemistry operates. Through Davies's eyes, or through the crater's eyes, for they were the same now, I could see the other men in their dugouts, but also through them, into the spaces between what they were and what they thought they were. Morrison, for instance, was simultaneously asleep and standing watch, and already dead 3 days hence, and eternally falling into himself like a house of cards that never quite completes its collapse. The beautiful thing, Davies said, his hand still editing distance to maintain contact with my skull, is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. The seeing changes you. You're changing right now. Can you feel it? I could. Something behind my eyes was learning to perceive angles that don't exist in three-dimensional space. My spine was developing opinions independent of my brain. My lungs were discovering they could breathe things other than air. They could breathe concepts, abstractions, the spaces between heartbeats. Why? I managed to ask, though the word came out textured like raw meat. Why assumes causality, Davies replied, patient as a teacher with a slow student. Causality assumes sequence. Sequence assumes time moves in one direction. But look, he turned my head, his hand still maintaining that impossible contact, and I saw the sun rising, but also setting, but also at noon, all simultaneously. The light layered on itself until it became something that wasn't quite light anymore but wasn't darkness either. In that not light, I could see the other men beginning their day. Thompson was shaving, dragging the razor across his cheek, but with each stroke he was also unshaving, the whiskers growing back instantly, and also not shaving at all, and also cutting deeper than whiskers, revealing structures underneath that looked like crystallized screaming. The crater wants to know you, Davies said. It's been watching you specifically. You're the only one who writes things down, who tries to maintain chronology. It finds this touching, like a child arranging dead leaves back onto trees, trying to make autumn run backward. I wanted to pull away, but my muscles had developed their own gravitational relationship with Davies's hand, or perhaps with the crater inside him, or perhaps with the thing the crater opened into. The distinctions were becoming academic. I have to go back now, Davies said, and for a moment he sounded like himself, like the Davies who'd shared his cigarettes and talked about his girl in Leicester. But the connection's been made. You'll start seeing things properly now. The war isn't what you thought it was. We're not fighting Germans. We're fighting the place where physics goes to die. He removed his hand, and the absence of contact was somehow worse than the touch had been, like pulling a tooth, but in reverse. Something essential had been installed rather than removed. He turned to leave, and I watched him walk away. Except walking isn't the right word. He moved through space like space was optional, sometimes here, sometimes there, sometimes spread across multiple theirs simultaneously. At the dugout entrance, he paused, turned back. In the not light of the rising setting noon sun, I could see through his face to the crater inside him, and through the crater to something vast and patient and hungry, in a way that had nothing to do with food. Oh, he added, as if remembering something trivial. In about 3 hours, when the morning hate starts, don't flinch when the shells come. They're not really shells. They're eggs, and they're starting to hatch. Then he was gone. not walked away. Gone, edited out, leaving only a Davies-shaped wrongness in the air that hurt to perceive directly. I sit here now, writing this at 0500 hours, as I said, though the clock reads also 0347 and 0612, and several times that don't correspond to any earthly mathematics. My hand moves across the page, but I'm not entirely certain I'm the one moving it. The pen feels like it's writing me as much as I'm writing with it. I can hear the men beginning to stir. Thompson has started shaving. The razor sounds wet, wetter than it should. The sunrise is beginning, all three of them. The light through my dugout entrance has started to pulse with a rhythm that matches something large breathing somewhere beneath us or above us. Direction, like sequence, like causality, is becoming negotiable. I should warn them about the shells that aren't shells, about the eggs, about what happens when things that were never meant to hatch in three-dimensional space begin to crown through the membrane between is and isn't. But my throat has developed its own agenda. It's learning to sing in frequencies that existed before sound was invented. The song has no words, but it means something like yes, and something like come, and something like the door is finally open. Davies was right. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The morning hate will begin soon. The shells that aren't shells will arrive. And when they do, when they start their specific type of blooming, I understand now that we won't run for cover. We'll stand very still and watch, because the thing that comes through the cracks they make will be so beautiful in its wrongness that we'll forget we ever wanted to be right. I can feel the crater looking at me through Davies's eyes, through the earth, through the paper, through the ink itself. It approves of this record. It wants me to continue writing, even as I change, even as the boundaries between self and not self become increasingly theoretical. My fingers are developing new joints, the better to hold the pen at angles that let me write in dimensions that don't have names. The words are beginning to mean different things than when I started writing them. This morning is becoming every morning, and every morning is becoming now, and now is becoming always, and always is spreading through the dugout like a vapor that thinks. The other men don't know yet, but they will. In 3 hours, or negative 3 hours, or all the hours at once when the eggs begin their impossible hatching, and we see what the war has really been gestating all along. I must continue writing. The crater insists, even as my hand begins to be not entirely a hand, even as the page begins to be not entirely a page, even as the words begin to crawl off into geometries that hurt.